Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the People's Podcast with myself, Taj Ali, and my co-host Basit Mahmood. With news of an exclusive European Super League causing outrage across the footballing world, today we're going to be looking at the alternative. Grassroots, fan-owned football clubs rooted in working class communities. Today we're joined by Annu and Robin Cowan, both from Clapton Community FC, a fan-owned football club based in East London. Thank you both for joining us. Could you just tell us a bit more about yourselves?
So my background is in community activism and fundraising for grassroots organisations. I am also on the Newham Youth Safety Board. I'm a member of Clapton Community Football Club, and I am one of the directors of the Old Spotted Dog Ground Trust. So helping to manage London's oldest senior football ground in Forest Gate. I have lived in Forest Gate for over 20 years now, so the grounds is a 10-minute walk from me.
Yep, I got involved. I started going to Clapton as just a punter, really, back in 2012, when it was a lot quieter and a lot less going on. And just, started as a supporter, went through the sort of journey of kind of growing that support and kind of organising together around the club. And then obviously became a member of Clapton CFC, had a brief stint on the club board, and now I'm with Annu on the Old Spotted Dog Ground Trust. I grew up in Clapton, E5, but now I live in Newham, so I'm kind of marrying those two together. And yeah, I'm a director on the Ground Trust as well.
So I just want to Clapton FC is a kind of, in some respects, a polar opposite of what we saw happen in the last week, whereby the European Super League, I'm sure people are aware, lasted for about 2 days, probably shortest announced and intended league in history. Well, Florentino Perez says it's not dead, but it was an attempt by kind of 12 European major teams to break away, form their own league, and it kind of led to a lot of outrage because and correct me if I'm wrong, but the main issue is that it goes against the idea of sporting meritocracy and the idea that everyone should have an equal shot. There was a total of kind of 20 teams, but 5 of those were going to be allowed to come in on merit, or sporting merit, and qualify, whereas kind of there was these 12 founding members plus 3 others that they hadn't announced that, for them it was a given that they'd always play. And it kind of led to a lot of outrage and it led to a lot of anger amongst fans. But there's also this wider debate around, it's disrespectful to fans. The average working man or woman just wants to be able to afford a ticket and see their team play. And it's an attempt by clubs to break away even further. Is that a journey that you recognise at Clapton FC whereby owners or fans, for example, their concerns are relegated to the background, just in terms of the trajectory of your own club and how it formed?
I'll jump in, Annu, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why Clapton Community FC, Clapton CFC, exists essentially, as opposed to the Clapton FC, as it was previous to us kind of becoming a fan-owned entity, is primarily because of the sort of marginalisation of supporters. And obviously we're in a much smaller scale than what's happening with the European Super League, but the journey is kind of similar, and sort of inspiration taken from like clubs like AFC Wimbledon, and FC United, who, saw clubs moving in a direction that they weren't comfortable with, and saw their efforts into sort of growing a club or being part of a club sort of disregarded or used in a sort of nefarious way. And ultimately, we decided, because of the actions of the, in quotes, owner, we made the decision that essentially we were just going to organise ourselves, and put out a team and run a football club in a way that, we thought was appropriate for our kind of community. So it germinated from a similar state, and I'd really like to see what will happen next in terms of these sort of disenfranchised Liverpool, Arsenal, supporters who are out there protesting last night, for instance, what they do next, what their next step is, because it's, you know, it's all very well sort of continuing to back like a sort of billionaire class that are completely disregarding what they're doing, and then the next step obviously is, do you organise together and do you do something else?
Just to add to what Robin has said, I mean, the core of Clapton Community FC is its 1,700 members actually collectively make those decisions. It's run by the supporters, and that's a marked difference between, you know, the clubs that, you know, Robin has mentioned, the recent ESL, and, you know, our club is about inclusivity and listening to our supporters, and I think there's a, you know, that's where the difference is.
And so how did that come about, you know, becoming a fan-owned club? I'm guessing you might have had quite a bit of backlash from it. Was it quite a difficult process? Could you just tell us more about maybe how you guys got involved and what that journey's been like since?
Well, essentially there was someone running Clapton Football Club, who, as the crowds were kind of steadily growing through the efforts of the supporters, you know, we were very conscious that nothing was changing within the grounds. The players weren't being treated any differently or any better. And there was a kind of growing frustration of that we're pulling in crowds, you know, that, you know, teams 2-3 leagues above us would be very happy to have, and nothing was improving. And the other thing that, you know, and that all sort of came to a head where that particular individual decided to put the ground effectively into liquidation. With, you know, he was quite upfront about it, with the idea to portion off a part of it and sell it for personal gain, or, you know, to pay off debts owed to him supposedly. So essentially we kind of we'd been organising based on the kind of Clapton Members Club that had been going since 1877, and we just kind of with the support of the sort of older members, what are called the life members, we'd effectively just been kind of like organising together, carrying on, having meetings, engaging with the community. And it was a dialogue with Supporters Direct, essentially, who said, why are you putting all this effort in, you know, to someone who's ultimately doesn't have the club's best interests at heart? Why don't you just field a team of your own? If you are the club, if you are the membership, why don't you just field a team? And that's essentially like, that was a bit of a light bulb moment. You know, it's like, why aren't we putting out our own team? You know, why aren't we kind of channeling all this really positive energy into something where we actually have the ability to guide where it goes? So that was essentially the start of it. And I can't really say there was any backlash. It's actually kind of overwhelmingly like positive in terms of like, we didn't know how supported this move would be.
Okay.
But instantly we just kind of gathered lots of members. And as Annu says, we've got close to 1,700, I think now.
Just, I mean, this is an open question to either of yourselves. What do you make of the claim that, I mean, I know Arsene Wenger about 10, 11 years ago said that this European Super League was always going to happen. There's this idea that it was inevitable because the big clubs think that, you know, the pandemic, and we've seen this in other areas of life where they're arguing that the pandemic just accelerated an already existing trend, that financially it wasn't viable for these huge clubs to exist in the current way they are. And that's why they had to play. What do you make of that financial inevitability argument?
I mean, if you kind of create football on a model where the majority of revenue is created through television, then there's possibly an argument for that. If you view football differently, and view football as a sort of, you know, football clubs as community assets, then that kind of flies in the face of that. So it really is down to a sort of conflict between the average supporter and the sort of billionaire class that currently run the major football clubs, in my personal opinion.
I mean,
sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, I mean, the kind of outrage by fans, the collective kind of outrage, which I thought was brilliant, with the ESL. I mean, what, surprises me in a way is that where the outrage in terms of how expensive football is, the ticket prices, the family going to see football, and so that outrage, if we could, apply that to other things, other issues in football, just imagine, what fans collectively could do, and things like kind of racism and homophobia. And so, I think it's a really positive thing that this has happened, but, football is expensive in Premier League games.
I was just going to ask, I was looking into some of the history of Clapton CFC, and they were saying that one of the things I came across was that the owners were initially keen to keep the fans out of the decision-making process. And I understand that there's other kind of people with like-minded plans to yourselves of grassroots teams and teams up and down the country want to do something similar, but they think the owner. So can I just ask, kind of, what were some of the mechanisms that were initially being used to keep the fans out of there? Because there was something around, this is going to be reviewed, or certain procedures was continuously being reviewed just to keep the fans out and not allowing the fans an input. What were some of the mechanisms that initially kind of was used to put the barriers in place to stop fans taking part?
So yeah, previous to Clapton CFC becoming the fan-owned entity, Clapton had always been a members club, right back to its first day in the 1870s. And it's remarkable, really, that it was a kind of unbroken chain of members right the way through to the 21st century. And when the people who were running the club recently kind of took control, they unilaterally decided to close the membership for what they said was for restructuring. And this restructuring was a kind of, as you say, a rolling year on year, never reopened. It was highlighted to us that this was done illegitimately because it was done in court. So it didn't have enough of the members' approval to actually suspend the membership. Which is when in 2014 the existing sort of life members decided just to start holding public meetings again and invite local residents and supporters to join as members. And that's essentially when we started to organise as a football club. And it was a kind of the genesis of the fan-owned entity, essentially. So that was ultimately a reaction to, as you were saying, this sort of stalling and keeping us at arm's length.
So what would you make of the claim by some that, fans can't run clubs, they don't have the expertise? Do you think that is the future of football ownership in this country?
I mean, I think what we've kind of demonstrated is that at a particular level, a community model where you gather the skills and energy from a large group of people really, really works. And we can only really, we can point to an example of, we've sold 16,000 away shirts, which kind of puts us, in terms of replica sales, puts us above a lot of championship clubs. And that was done through sourcing ideas through a collective group of people. So at our level, it definitely works. And I would definitely encourage more groups of supporters to think along those lines. I think the broader net, you can gather more and more skills, although there's probably the way that football's sort of structured now, and the sort of heavy reliance on big money and big finance. I think if you wanted to run up the leagues, I think you might encounter issues, although AFC Wimbledon are proving still, they're in League One now, and have just built a brand new stadium in London, with London land prices, that is possible. and certainly is more kind of fan-owned clubs developing in Scotland as well, that definitely show that at a top level it can be done. It still hasn't emerged in the top two leagues in England, really, in the sort of purest sort of fan-owned form. But I suppose it's not in the interests of the big six to allow that to happen, really.
Yeah, I think, again, just to demonstrate with our 1,700 members, there's a huge kind of skill set there. There's different ways of supporting the organisation. It's, through membership, which is as little as £5 a year. There's the shirt sales, other merchandise. There's, members who are now coming to the grounds and doing practical things from, cleaning and carpentry, and, and we're getting so much local kind of encouragement and support as well. So you don't have to be a member to help us with day-to-day things. Saying that, the challenges are, with COVID over the last 12 months, it has made things more difficult in terms of fundraising and getting as many people to help us. But with the ease of lockdown, we're seeing, again, it's really encouraging just how many people want to support us. And as I said, there's so many different ways to get involved.
And Clapton CFC is very much embedded within the communities that it kind of operates in. So I was looking, and you guys do a lot of charity work with vulnerable LGBT communities, women and children experience violence and stuff. And I was wondering if you could just talk a bit about that. And that's quite important because, obviously the big clubs have this CSR responsibility and they go around doing it. But for a club like yourself, which is fan-owned, to still be doing that is quite, inspiring and impressive. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about some of the community projects and wider outreach projects you've been involved in.
Yeah. Clapton CFC has a history of supporting and fundraising and backing kind of organisations and individuals. We have members who've supported New Monitoring Project, New Asian Women's Project. We campaigned for the London Renters Union, supported the New Bookshop. We support the annual kind of Newham toy appeal, food banks via a local project in Forest Gate, the Magpie Project. And we've supported kind of individuals like Edson de Costa, Russian Charles, and more recently, the 3-year anniversary of the murder of Forest Gate resident Sammy Sidham, who was murdered on his way home from a West Ham game just a few doors away from his home. We've also, supported an initiative which was the DKMS Football versus Blood Cancer drive at one of our games. 100 people signed up for this register, and statistically, that's 4 people that are able to have a blood stem cell transplant, and that was all done through the club, through kind of members, local community activism. So that's just some of our examples, but Robin, you might want to add more to that, and that continues with local schools. But as I mentioned, due to COVID, we've had to put some of those things on hold. But something recently that we received an award for was our hardship fund.
Yeah.
During COVID, we won the Football Supporters Association Local Heroes Award, and that supported lots of people during the last 12 months, which we're really proud of.
Yeah, personally, I think it's sort of the role of a club like ours to sort of be, to engage in the community in that way. You kind of mentioned the sort of corporate responsibility wings of the big football clubs, and these, there's some really amazing work done by them, where our work, Arsenal and the community, do a lot in Islington. but ultimately a club like ours can be so much more local and take on sort of concerns and issues of a community that are so so more sort of targeted around where we are. You know, bigger football clubs have far greater reach and have to be a bit more broad brush in a lot of ways. And some of the things that Annu sort of listed off there, I mean, you know, it probably wouldn't be appropriate for, you know, Liverpool or Tottenham to sort of get involved in. Where a club like ours, you know, we can kind of be a lot more kind of in touch with the people in and around the ground.
And am I right in thinking so? In 2018, the club chose to wear the kind of red, purple, and yellow colours of the international brigades. That made a lot of headlines, and you know, team sold over 15,000 replica shirts. That's quite.
I think you're wearing it now, aren't you?
Yes, it's actually close to 16,000 away shirts, and to honour the international brigade who fought in the Second Spanish Republic Civil War. We've taken about 16,000 orders.
It's quite impressive. Can I just ask? This is quite interesting in the sense that football scene in the UK is this kind of big engine of social mobility in some respects. You know, you get working class lads, working class girls from working class communities who are able to succeed in this sport, and it's seen as quite a bit of a meritocracy. Do you think there's a kind of class barrier sometimes between the owners or owners who don't, for example, billionaire owners who don't reside in the UK, and kind of this grassroots working class communities that kind of see football as a way of kind of organising, but also, you know, they enjoy the game, seen as a way to kind of, you know, have fun with friends and colleagues. Do you see a class difference emerging between those kind of two?
I mean, I think any shared territory between working class people and a billionaire class or a wealthy class, there's going to be a conflict. Just the power dynamics within that will create issues, particularly when you've got sort of cultural assets that are then being exploited for financial gain. There's always going to be an issue around that. I mean, I think what's happened with the sort of super rich owners and the sort of role that Sky and TV has played in football is that football fans have become quite disempowered and sort of lost a collective way of organising, which hopefully has sort of exploded in the last week or so. It's really positive to see. But, you know, football has kind of gone from people collectively organising to grow football clubs, to start their own football clubs, into sort of passive customers ultimately. So that there's inevitable sort of disconnect there. I mean, what's really interesting about the away colours, the international brigades, is that, you know, that was people from working class communities, a lot from East London, that just decided that they were going to make a stand about something. You know, they weren't recruited. There was no sort of power directing them to go anywhere. There was no pressure on them to do so. It was working class people feeling empowered to do something that meant a lot to them.
Yeah.
Which I think, you know, is a wonderful story to tell anyway. There's one of the inspirations behind the shirt was that there's a plaque in the park next to our ground of a local person who went to fight. You know, so it's such a hyper local as well as an internationalist theme. And it shows that, you know, working class people can be empowered, can go out and do things, you know, and it's not that you don't necessarily have to kind of wait for the direction of the kind of ruling classes or the capitalist classes or the kind of wealthy owners of football clubs of when to do something.
Yeah. I mean, your club has a huge reputation being an anti-fascist club, but also an anti-racist club. I mean, last week we were talking about, you know, the lack of representation of Asian footballers in the league and the racism and discrimination they face. But, you know, your club's based in East London, a very diverse community. And your model, the cooperative model where every fan, you know, has a membership and gets to vote, how does that work in practice then? Do you have very regular meetings? And I think that's probably why you've seen a lot of these initiatives that people can come in and bring in their ideas and expertise.
Yeah, the structure for Clapton CFC, it's a horizontal structure. There is, there is no one owner, there is no one person in charge. There's various kind of working groups and committees set up and run by its members. And so that is, the day-to-day running of the club. It includes not just organising the games, but the comms leading up to the games, the live streaming, the organising the caterers, the officials for the games, the watching the players' kit. It's everything, and it's run by various committees. In terms of meetings, it's very much dependent on each of the committees. We also have kind of a general meeting. The club has a general meeting and an AGM, and then the trust that Rob and I are both on, the Old Spotted Dog Ground Trust, we as a group of 8 directors meet on a regular basis, and we make decisions like that. And there's, as we've mentioned before, there's a voting kind of system. So if there's decisions to be made, it all goes back to the 1,700 members.
Yeah, I mean, like definitely just to echo Annie's point there, and to highlight what you said, Taj, there, like the horizontal structure is designed to invite collaboration, essentially. There's no one ultimately assuming power or a leadership role, which kind of disenfranchises members, or it shouldn't work that way anyway. So it's designed ultimately to invite as many people in as possible, and to gather as many ideas, skills, and energy, essentially. And the structure is the cooperative structure is great because it means that no one can be edged out by someone who has more resources. It's one member, one vote.
Yeah.
And it really is purely down to how much time you can devote or which groups you want to join. And people can be inactive or as passive as they like. You can turn up and just be a punter on the day, or you can join loads of committees and put forward all your ideas. And yeah,
I mean, it makes us think of when we look at the Premier League, for example, it's money that drives a lot of that decision making when it comes to the transfer market. And there is that temptation from the clubs to avoid, having that model that's a bit more open, and rather just looking at the people with the resources and the people with the money. So I'm just wondering, do you think there's any way that clubs like Liverpool, like Man United, can kind of take from what you've done and learn from it and adopt it in their own clubs?
I mean, it's difficult. When they're kind of playing with the amount of money, when you've got players in your squads that are earning 250 grand a week, it's insane amount of money that's floating around that level of football, which means that I can understand why big clubs are massively risk averse. But you've seen with the European Super League, how disconnected and how insular these clubs have become, that they misjudge so massively like what their supporters' feelings were on the matter. So it's really it's by creating this massive value and playing with these huge amounts of huge figures. Ultimately, they've kind of created a bubble for themselves where they're so disconnected from actually what the football club is about, which is the supporters.
Yeah, and just to pick on what Robin said earlier, about passive customers, it is driven by money and corporate sponsorship, and it's just a transactional relationship with fans. And I think adopting some of our values, of course it will be brilliant. We're not a club about transactions. Our players don't get paid. None of our players get paid. We have 7 teams now, and we talk to the players. We have lunch with the players. We're friends with the players. where else would you get that? If it's, you know, this is what grassroots community football clubs are about. It's not transaction at all. It's very much about engagement.
Just as a final kind of question from myself, if you, I mean, to both, if you had one message for grassroots fans clubs up and down the country who are desperately trying to wrestle back control, we've heard that phrase before, but want to kind of take back control of their clubs, just in your own kind of words, what's your message for them if they're feeling kind of thinking that, you know, the owners and everyone else has got far too much power and far too many tools at their disposal for them to even contemplate doing what you guys have done?
So my message would be join your local grassroots non-league club. It's not just about football, it's about that community activism. We've given examples of just, you know, what we've been able to achieve in the last 3 years, and we want to do a lot more. So that would be my message. You know, you can make decisions collectively, locally. You can benefit your local community by joining your local grassroots football club.
And, you know, just for sort of, you know, supporters of clubs that are a bit further down the pyramid like ourselves, I mean, there's a lot of support out there that we found. As I said previously, it was Supporters Direct that really guided us through. And once you start to engage, there's a you know, really strong supportive community of supporter-owned clubs out there. You know, we are in regular contact with FC United, for instance. Enfield Town are another really you know, good supporter-owned club that do a lot of great stuff. And there's a really strong, healthy network that you can tap into. So if it's, you know, you know, a issue of not knowing where to step first or not knowing what to do, engaging in this process, you'll find actually there's loads of support, and there are a lot of people there who will actively guide you through to get you through the first stages.
Thank you so much. So that brings us to an end. Thank you for listening, everyone. Please do follow our YouTube channel and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. But thank you, Robin and Annu, for all your time and expertise.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.